we're supposed to get started, I should say. So we'll do this in English. I hope that's fine for everyone. Really happy that so many came to join us. So the plan is to actually have a sort of an informal, formal discussion or interview with Tommy about where VR, AR, and MR is heading. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to raise your arm, and I will try to bring it up. But first, let me introduce Tommy Palm. You should introduce yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will. So my name is Tommy Palm. I met Johan back when I studied at KTH, I think, Royal Institute of Technology, back in the mid-90s, I should say.
That just makes us sound really old.
Yeah, that's true. I've been passionate gamer and started out as a programmer, making games on a hobby basis for quite some time. I started my first company back in the late 90s called Jadestone, focused on making mobile games. And since then, I've started 5 companies. My latest company is called Resolution Games, and we focus on making what we call visual computing, which is basically MR. So augmented reality and virtual reality game content primarily. And yeah, that's what we're here to talk about.
Sure. So the idea is actually to discuss what Tommy and his company has had for the experiences they've had building games and virtual experiences for these types of devices and experiences, and also bring that into like how we can actually build apps with similar features. So if you're interested in those types of questions, if you're interested in game, I know that Tommy will be happy to answer those questions as well. So, but just to get started, so you mentioned VR, MR, and AR. Those are 3 definitions of not the same thing, but kind of different. So what is your definitions of like VR, MR, and AR?
Well, I think virtual reality is the one that's maybe easiest to define, and that's when you are totally immersed in something that you don't see the real world, you only see the virtual world that we built. And right now we're very far along as science on visual and audio, but the idea is to trick your senses, and we have 5. There's a lot of research going on smell and touch and taste as well, but
wow.
Yeah, you don't really need them always. You don't want to maybe smell a dark dungeon with something creepy in it. And it's also very difficult.
Yep.
The smell particles tend to clump together and form what they refer to as brown smells, which is not very pleasant. Yeah, perhaps. But touch is one very, very important thing. They're a bit along on trying to simulate your hands, so you can use your hands in virtual reality. Some people have even recently shown gloves, which has proper haptic feedback, so you can touch a spider and actually feel, get resistance when you see it, which is incredibly exciting. But there is no commercial products out there yet. There are some haptic pens and things like that, but not connected to VR at this point. But a lot of exciting research is happening. So that's the virtual reality field, and that's the one that I would say has come the farthest. It still isn't a market that is really big enough to allow for commercial success. It's still in its infancy. The first commercial hardware for consumers came out in 2016. So it's quite a new field, and there is some very exciting progress, especially coming out during next year. So there is, among other things, something called Oculus Quest, which is a headset that is untethered, so it doesn't have any cables, and it has everything it needs to run. And in the headset you strap on, and you have 2 kind of joysticks for your hands, so you can use your hands and pick virtual objects up in as well. So that, I think, is going to be very important for the virtual reality market.
Being untethered.
Being untethered, yes. Okay. And allowing these untethered devices to have what we call 6 degree of freedom for both your head, so it means you can lean in and look at things closer, and for your hands, so we can know exactly what position, how far away your hands are from each other. There's a lot of 3DoF initiatives right now. So there's something called Oculus Go, among other things, where you can look around, but you can't lean in, and the controller is the same thing. We don't know where it is exactly, but we know what direction it's pointing to. So you can use it as a laser pointer. It works well for that. So that kind of sums the VR segment together, yes. And of course, there's a lot of initiatives from Microsoft here as well. They were announced last year, I think, and they kind of sneaked rollout. And we haven't seen a lot about it here in Sweden, at least. No. I think they focused more on the stores, the Microsoft stores in the US.
Yes,
regionally.
The bigger markets, yes.
Yeah. So, how many of you in here have tried the Microsoft VR stuff?
Okay, couple of you.
Very few hands. Yep. So it hasn't had a really wide penetration yet. I think that's safe to say. But
I think that more people has tried the augmented version, the mixed version, the HoloLens, than actually the immersive experiences like the Samsung or the Dell or such. So
can we have a raise of hands who tried HoloLens just to get a much better? And I guess you probably tried it at a conference or something like that, rather than you have one at home and you'd play it every day. No. It's still pretty pricey, right?
Yes.
I brought Magic Leap with me here today, so you can come up and touch it. Of course, I don't think we have time for everybody to try it out. Unfortunately, we can have a few try it out. So we recently released a game here called Angry Birds First Person Slingshot.
For this type of device?
Yes, and that this is augmented reality, head-mounted augmented reality. I like to differ from mobile augmented reality, because iPhone and Android phones now support ARKit and ARCore, which is libraries for finding surfaces with the more modern phones.
Yep.
And you can make games or experiences there. There is a few, nothing that is really a huge commercial hit yet. But I think there is a lot of interest in this field, and people are investing a lot in trying to make it happen. One of the great things augmented reality can bring to mobile applications is a very good way of navigating 3D space. Say that you have a skiing resort, for instance, and you have quite a complex map over where all the different systems are. That's typically something that's very hard to represent in 2D. But in 3D, it's much easier to actually draw the whole system, and then you can move around your camera or your phone in order to see a real representation of it in a very intuitive way. You could, of course, do that in 2D too by moving your finger over the screen, but it's very hard to do that so people understand what's happening. It quite easily becomes very complex. This is typically stuff that we as game developers work a lot with, trying to make complex interaction simple, so it's fun. Sure. It's one of the key things. So that's on the augmented reality field. So we have two major things. That's head-mounted AR, which basically haven't really come yet. We have HoloLens and we have Magic Leap, which just released a month or two in the US.
Yes.
And then mobile AR, there's much more of.
Yeah, and then Microsoft has this definition of mixed reality, like trying to bring these two together. Do you agree with that definition, saying that we have an immersive experience with real-life objects represented into this virtual experience?
Yes, so there is a lot of different definition being thrown around. XR is another definition that basically these all refer to the same thing. One thing you can have, for instance, is a virtual reality headset and use those cameras to get a see-through image, and then you have augmented reality again, or mixed reality, whatever you want to call that. So the definition hasn't really set yet, I think.
Okay. Makes sense.
Since Microsoft is now calling it MR, then you can bet that Google and Apple won't call it MR.
That's right.
So that's why we at Resolution we refer to it as visual computing instead. And the reason for that, I think that this is a very, very big shift actually. This is similar to what we had with personal computers in the 80s or smartphones in the early 2000s. It's a paradigm shift where eventually these type of glasses will be light enough for us to want to replace a big screen that you have in your pocket or a big screen that you can have behind you. There is a lot of super interesting use cases for this type of technology that is outside of games. Games is one of the things that always trailblazing and is an early use case for technology that people are willing to pay a little bit for. So it's in that sense, it's very fun to be a software development company focused on games.
So you brought up mobile because your history was earlier in mobile, and you saw similar trends to mobile and now into VR and these types of devices. So I know that how big is Resolution Games now? 50 people or something like that?
40.
40, okay. So it's kind of a big company for being a Swedish standard at least. So, and you're betting all of this company for these types of devices, which is trying to make it on the market. That's kind of brave. So,
well, I think that's the startups. You have to do something unique. Yeah. So you typically want to do something that bigger companies are slower to embrace. There is this talk about the blue ocean and red ocean scenario, where the blue ocean is somewhere where there is plenty of fish for everybody, and red ocean is colored by the blood of the fishes, and there's a lot of sharks hunting in that space. And I think that a lot of the other mobile games is a perfect example of a red ocean scenario where it's very, very hard to enter that market and try to compete with the Supercells and the Kings of the world. They have tremendous marketing budgets and budgets behind making game there, which is kind of interesting because mobile games used to be the simpler way of getting into the games market, where the consoles were the much tougher competition space. But I think that there's a shift now. I think PC is again the more innovative space.
Okay, cool. So any questions so far? Okay, we've talked about the definitions of VR, AR, and MR, and XR in the notice on you. And being early in the market, naturally giving you a key position. You have you just raised some money.
Yeah, we just raised $7.5 million at an evaluation of 87.5 million. So very high valuation for a company that is still in its infancy in terms of making revenues. So, but I think that's showing that there is a lot of belief that this is going to be a paradigm shift in the different things that you can do on this platform. It will be valid for games. I mean, from a gaming point of view, it's fantastic to finally be able to be inside the game world. As somebody who loved video games since Donkey Kong and this type of experience back in the 80s, I saw there was a Pac-Man up here on the arcade machine. And this allows you to actually be inside a completely virtual world and do things in there, which is extremely immersive. And I think and hope that it will also open up for much more people than traditional gamers, which is a very, very small part of the population. Probably some of you here in my age enjoys playing video games on a console. I know you do. Yep. But there's still a lot of people that's not in that sphere that feels that video games is a waste of time, or it maybe it's too complex. They don't feel that it's not for them. But I hope and think that that's something that's going to change a lot. I think that a lot of a lot of content, both having to do with things like education, for instance, where you're able to experience, Greek dinner 2,000 years ago, and really feel like you were there and be extremely inspired. And instead of reading about it, which has not so good impact on your memory and your ability to learn things, you'll be able to experience it on your own, which is very, very, very cool.
That brings up a follow question, because when VR and AR and MR was announced for games specifically, there was a lot of traction, a lot of different experiences being implemented almost at the same time. It's like a lot of different engines were available and a lot of different games came up. And it has been sort of stalled, I think, the last 6 to 9 months. It's like everyone is waiting for the next step.
I think there has been a lot of disappointment from many sources that people thought that this 2016 wave of virtual reality was going to take off. We were a little bit cautious, having gone through this cycle with mobile games. This time I realized it won't happen directly. I left Royal Institute of Technology. I didn't finish my studies there. I went home to my parents and said, I have to quit instantly. Mobile games is about to happen, and I need every second I can get. 10 years later, the iPhone came along and made it economically viable to make a living out of mobile games. So this time I was way more cautious, and one of the reasons of raising quite a lot of money is to be able to take it easy and be able to accelerate when the right timing is there, which is always very difficult to see in advance, of course.
So do you think there are some experiences or games that is available now that shows a hint of where we are going? Like there are some new aspects or some cool games and such that really get some traction, like Beat Saber is one of them.
That's a great example. So in Beat Saber you are hacking along with your lightsabers on objects that's coming towards you. Yeah. And you have to do that in...
Have you seen Beat Saber? Anyone seen it? Okay. If you haven't, you should really try it out on a demo somewhere. It's also something which I think it enforces what you talked about earlier with the touch or the scenario of getting feedback. Because when you put these, you have two handles and you have the two lightsabers within the game. But when you cross the beams, you actually get a vibration sense in the handle, in the controllers, meaning that you get a physical representation of crossing these lightsabers, which is really cool. And it gives you an impact of like, I'm really there.
No, I think Beat Saber is a great example of something that is rather casual and fun to do, and you get a little bit of an exercise doing it. But I think that the most obvious, if you want to really understand how incredibly powerful virtual reality can be, trying something horror related is way too efficient. I'm not big on horror myself, but it becomes very, very clear to your brain that you believe that this is true if you try to be in a dark dungeon somewhere and things jump out or there's things that you're scared. There is nothing in your body that doubts that this is 100% real. Which is very interesting. The first games that we started out making, we've been very much focused on doing more accessible experiences. So we knew we didn't want to do horror. And we said, one of the first things that would be amazing is to have this really nice nature experience where you're on a peak of a hill and you look out and you have a lot of wonderful view ahead of you. But that is extremely complex to trick your brain into believing that you're actually outside and that it is something beautiful. So we focused our first game around that type of experience. It was a fishing game experience where you are in a beautiful nature experience and you fish, which is rather simple to do. And so it was a great first big game for us to do. And this is now one of the biggest VR games out there with 2.5 million downloads on Oculus alone. So that's been very helpful for us. But to the horror things, it's much easier for your brains to believe them. And in general, darker scenes are easier to make. That's a really interesting thing with both virtual reality and augmented reality, that a lot of it is about tricking the brain into believing that the objects are there. And of course, making things realistic is incredibly difficult. Especially some objects like humans is something that a very large part of our brain is trained on, looking at faces and instantly seeing if there is something wrong. If somebody is not responding the way you're thinking they would do, you get very uneasy. There's this uncanny valley that we speak a lot about in game development, when you're almost there with the closer you are to a real human, the more important it is that every single detail is correct. So it's much easier to do a cartoon character with very few human things, like just an eye and 2 eyes and a mouth. You'll have an easier time to believe that that's not creepy,
yep.
basically. So I definitely think that there is a lot of things that the game industry is doing on a kind of research field that is very relevant to other companies, whatever you're working with. If you are interested in VR or AR, because that is a great way of teaching new employees how to do complex tasks, or just getting them to understand the bigger picture.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a short discussion earlier with another partner here, talking about, like, if I want to learn something new, which I'm not capable of today, like purchase like that educational material through an augmented store or something, augmented reality experience. Like, say I want to fix a motorcycle or something like that. I want to learn how to pick down the engine and then put it all together. Doing it by myself could be hard. I can read about it, but doing it augmented must be not easy, I should say, but easier, helping me tell you this is the object you should start with, and put these details over there. And these objects must be very easy to identify as well.
Yes, that's especially true once augmented reality is at the state where computer vision can identify the objects that you are looking at.
Yeah.
That's something that is ongoing.
Yeah.
Big companies like Google, they have a project called Lens, for instance, when they are trying to figure out what it is that the computer is seeing in the world. So that's why they have Google Photos for free, because they're collecting images from our weddings and Christmases, and just crunching numbers on trying to figure out what is in these photos. And you can follow this quite close as a consumer, because you can use Google Photos and you can search for very abstract things there, like wedding or handsome, and you will see that it's much better at identifying things that is common in household pictures. Wedding, for instance, is a good example of something that people take a lot of pictures, so there's a lot of material to train AI on. Whereas hallway, for instance, almost nobody takes pictures in a hallway, so it's much worse at recognizing that, which is interesting. And if you use Google Photos, both on Android and iPhone, you can find Lens. It's hidden inside it, and it's very experimental. But it can help identifying, for instance, famous buildings in a photo.
Okay.
Or if you have a business card, it can identify the text. You can, with one click, call the person on that business card.
Cool.
So it's cool, but it's you have to know that it's there in order to find it. But eventually, I think the idea is that you will then utilize Google's massive engines and integrate this into your app in order to recognize, for instance, text or common day objects.
Sure. So you also talked about well, let's step back. If you haven't really tried out virtual experiences or augmented experiences, there are actually at least two companies in Stockholm. I'm not going to say their names because it's being recorded and that would be like commercial, but there are experiences where you can actually visit them and play around with virtual experiences in a fun environment, and you will immediately notice that you are really tricked by what you're saying with being like in a dark room and something comes out of the walls and zombies and you have to shoot them and such. But also that, as you mentioned, that you can look down on the floor, but if there is no floor, you will actually get like sort of vertigo. And I have a friend. We did this last week in Bromma, and we were standing on a like a what do you call it? Plateau, yeah, and it was flying over. It was really abstract. Naturally, we were flying on a piece of rock, but there was nothing beneath us. And I just did this on him, and he's still angry about me because he thought he was gonna fall. So he still complains like you shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, it's your body is very primitive in a lot of these ways, and you very easily, if you stand up and put on a virtual headset and you look down and don't see your feet, it's very easy to lose your balance, for instance. There's a lot of these things that you kind of have to figure out. One of the things that's super interesting is that this is about tricking the brain, right? And as a species, we still don't know how the brain works properly. I mean, there's a paradox there. If the brain was simple enough for us to understand it, we wouldn't have enough brain power to fully understand it. We can more or less understand the brain of a banana fly or something, I think, or that's the stage we're on. It's an extremely complex thing. So you have to kind of test things and see what happens when you do it, which is slightly terrifying when you're, for instance, if you have kids, if they're under 12, they probably shouldn't play a lot of VR games just yet until there is proper research on it. I'm quite sure of it. Because of reasons that your eyes are developing until a certain age.
I find that kind of sad because my son, that's the only exercise he's getting currently. It's just standing around Beat Saber or the job simulator.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's sweating all around, so we can't use the systems after him because it's not nice. But he's exercising.
Okay.
And he's only 11. So
he's only 11. You're doing the research then, so we other can so let our kids on when we know it's.
So if he's messed up around 18, it's my fault.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Not cool, I guess. Okay, so we talked some examples of some of the games, and we talked about some of the different devices. Something that we also briefly touched upon is like these physical aspects. Like you talked about, we have the controls, the pointers in the experiences. We have gloves coming up. So are there other interaction patterns that are interesting, like speech?
Yes, definitely. I think speech is one of these things that there is a revolution happening there a little bit in parallel. And of course, using natural language is very core to us as beings. So that is something that I hope will advance quite quickly now. And I think this Google Home and Alexa and Microsoft Cortana, okay. These are great because they're getting a lot of training and they will rapidly become better and better. And then hopefully we can use them in games, for instance, which I would love to have virtual characters kind of understanding what you're saying. That's something. The first Swedish video game, Stugan, that was made in 1978. That's where you're typing instructions, very simple instructions, and it's been a dream of a lot of game developers that one day you would be able to very freely say whatever you want and understand it. It also comes into play when you're doing social experiences. One of the really powerful things around both VR and AR is being there with somebody else who is not in the same room as you or not in the same country, but being together for the fact that you really feel presence. If you feel like you teleported to another place and you hear and see a virtual representation of your friend or family member, that is extremely convincing that you are in that space together. and it's definitely going to be a very powerful social platform to collaborate on work, or eventually replace things like video calls. But unfortunately, the virtual representation of humans is one big obstacle that people are struggling with. So in the beginning, it will be very cartoony versions of us, and all the micro movements in your face that is very important in, for instance, sales meetings, or just looking out in the audience here, seeing if you're still interesting and participating. That's going to take some time before it breaks through.
So should we show the video that we talked about just to see
Sure.
what type of experiences have
Yeah,
been?
so this is an example of, I'll move out of the way. This is an example of the game we made most recently. We released this a couple of weeks ago for the Magic Leap, and it's called Angry Bird First Person Slingshot. So it's a collaboration. It's obviously not our IP, it's Rovio's. They are in Finland, but this was developed in Stockholm. So here. A short trailer, less than a minute, showing what type of experience. I have to cancel this because something else is going to come up. But as you see, it's like a little bit kind of informative, showing the headset because it's so early in the market. So you kind of have to show people what is going on, how will you experience this. So it's difficult to do these type of trailers because there is no great way of recording the gameplay. So we have to fake a lot of the things and then put it together so it becomes very similar to the type of experience you would have. But yeah, it's one way you can show a large group on what it is you're doing. Otherwise, there is no other way than actually trying it out, which is very limited and takes some setup time for each person.
I know that HoloLens has this what do you call it, sort of portal where you can actually stream what is being projected to the computer screen, and then you can show it that. That is pretty cool. Nice. You can just see what the others are experiencing. But
that will probably come here as well, yeah, but it's not available.
No, and I totally agree. It's not the same, but it's just seeing what's getting rendered, pretty much.
Yeah.
Cool. So a lot of focus on games. So do you see trends moving into apps? Like for a lot of these people in here are not game developers. They want to be everyone, but so apps, applications, or usage. We've talked about educational purposes, for instance.
Yeah. No, I definitely think. Yeah, and productivity is another huge area. So one interesting fact is that of the 40 people in our office in Stockholm, there are 40 people who are using virtual reality every day. And that's one of the first use cases when you actually have people working in VR. Yeah. Some of them on the programming side, they're mostly testing things so that they work the way they were supposed to. But on the 3D side, we have 3D modelers that's actually working in virtual reality and modeling objects. And of course, on level design, the person building these different levels that you saw, that person is inside virtual reality, doing part of it and testing all of it. So that's one use case where it will start. And there, because you have new worlds that has to be made, the need for 3D assets is going to be bigger than ever. So I think a lot of that will also move over to user-generated content. So Minecraft is one way, a great example of that, when you have kids building their own houses and places. But you could easily imagine somebody building a a chair, for instance, and selling that in a marketplace. There's several different marketplaces already that is doing that type of things, but that's something that I think will be more and more common, and you'll be able to easily pull in assets to your apps that you're creating. Because of course a key component there is building virtual rooms that will, no matter, I guess, almost what type of virtual reality or augmented reality app you want to build, you need 3D assets to do it.
So we talked. You mentioned how 3D, the skills of making 3D objects is naturally important. So are there other skills that is different from being like an app developer or a game developer per se, writing these virtual experiences?
Yeah, I think there is a shift going over to more that you need more and more people in content, illustrators, sound, voice acting, animation. There's a lot of skills that isn't in a traditional software company today. It's way easier to do 2D apps.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it takes longer to make 3D.
So does that mean that there are so sophisticated engines that already do this the infrastructure work and not having to focus on the details, instead just focusing on making actually experiences?
Yeah, so internally in our studio we use Unity, for instance.
Yep.
And I heard from a Unity speech earlier that 70% of everything made for virtual reality, doesn't matter if it's IKEA or ABB or whatever company, 70% of them are using Unity, which is a game engine to create their assets. And almost the other 30% is using Unreal Engine. So it's a big battle between two big game engines. I bet there's a lot of open source alternative as well, but these are very simple to download. There's a lot of online tutorial material. It's quite fast to get at least something up and running.
So just a quick comment there. The Unity engine, if you haven't really tried that out, it's free to download and play around with, and it's a C# based, or you can use C# or JavaScript, I should say, to build the code that is required for writing components and logic. Unreal Engine is a pure C++ engine then instead, so you have to know C++ to do that. So
yeah, you can also use their blueprints where you can actually drag
right,
and drop
right,
programs. So I have a few of the graphics guys that is building games just by using this blueprint technology instead. And Unity is not only free to download, but it's also free to actually publish your stuff, but you will get the Unity splash in the beginning.
Yeah, okay, cool. So, any questions? Okay, you should really, I recommend that you should actually go and download Unity at least, because it's a fun experience to play around with. It takes some, it's the first step is easy just to get into it. Then it gets harder to do anything really concrete. But if you get over it, you can do a lot of cool stuff. Also, it's an enabler of writing different types of apps and games, I should say. It's not just for games, as you mentioned, but you can do it for different platforms. It's iOS and Android and Windows and web, and there's a lot of different possibilities that you can use. So you really widen your scope, and I also know that Unity skill set is really required and asked for by not just game companies such as yourselves, but other companies as well. So it's something you can really look into.
And this has been a big game changer in the games industry in general. With this game here that we showed the trailer on, it was just 4 people who made the game in a very short period of time. We started in January and we delivered the game in September.
That's cool.
So it's quite cool, quite fast. And that's because you don't have to write all these things yourself anymore, which is great.
Okay. So Sweden is big in several areas. Now, even though we're not that important for stores and being the first player when new stuff is being launched and introduced in the worldwide market, but Sweden is ahead in several areas, like in games and in video and VR as well, I guess. So why is that, do you think?
Well, I think at least on the game side, Sweden has been extremely strong, and they've been out with figures that every 10th person in the world has played a Swedish video game. I think that's partially, there's a lot of different reasons. I think it's partially we have a strong engineering culture. We have very long, cold winters where it makes sense to sit at home with your friends to play video games instead of hanging out by the beach and learning how to surf. That was at least an important factor in my life. We were playing role-playing games and video games from an early age, and that was the way we were hanging out. And back then, the games you can learn to program yourself was on par with the ones that you bought at Åhléns or whatever it was. So it was very, very helpful. And that's now paying off. We also had Hem-PC-paketet back in the early 90s that I think actually had a very important role to play for early Swedish video game development, where people got
powerful PCs
with a lot of graphical power to them. And I think that's part of why they stopped with it, is that people got home entertainment systems instead of work computers. Which is a paradox now, because how much tax revenues haven't the Swedish game market generated back? So obviously you can have a lot of cool effects of those type of things that you don't think about when you make them happen.
So how big is the market for game developers now? So how many people do you know?
In Sweden, I think we're about 4,000 people working professionally with video game development. So it's still a rather small market in the sense of jobs. A lot of the jobs you read from factories that goes away, then it's 15,000 people are laid off, and the video game markets are really small. But the more interesting thing is how much money it can generate, right? When you have something like Minecraft being sold for $2.4 billion, I think, which was the work originally from just a single person and his home hacking.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, I think we could maybe mention one of the things that was very interesting working with Magic Leap now was to see how this 3D world really made a huge difference. Angry Birds was obviously a very popular 2D game before, and we had the opportunity to take this into real life 3D. So a lot of the game levels we designed so you would have to walk around them and kind of find a good attack angle, and once you had made a shot with your slingshot from that angle, you actually had to move around again. So to kind of remind people that you are free in the physical world to move around. It also has a really cool feature that if you place it on this table, for instance, level, and you shoot it, you can see how objects drop down behind and are obscured by the desk, and they will bounce on. If you have a chair down there, it identifies the chair in real time, and so you can shoot there and it can bounce off. That's really great features that is very, very early yet. So even though you can do it now, these things are going to be way more efficient in the future. So now when we decided, we really had to make sure that the rather low level of recognition it can't, for instance, recognize small objects like coffee cups and things. Otherwise, we would love to be able to let the player be innovative and place out physical objects to interact with the world. But that's just a matter of time.
Okay.
Maybe not for this device at this point, but maybe next generation of HoloLens will support at least smaller objects. Recognizing a chair is fairly easy right now. Horizontal surfaces are much easier than vertical surfaces for some reason. And when it comes to walls, they're very often white, like these walls here, and they have very few objects on them that you can recognize. But if you have paintings at home, it's easier. If you have reflective surfaces such as glass or mirrors, they are terrible because that makes the whole system very confused on where the depth layer actually is. There's a lot of those super interesting things that you get to discover as a developer on a very early platform.
So comment there is that I remember when Microsoft released their Kinect, it was also like something that identified objects in your living room or where you were playing. It was a really cool technology. It was based on really low cost components. It was cheap to manufacture, and also you can write some really cool stuff with it. It really didn't lift off, not because the experiences were bad per se, but instead it was like because you needed so much space to play around. So you had to have like a dedicated room for playing Kinect, and there you had to have a TV and everything like that. So do you see similar issues probably with this augmented experience as well? Like you're saying, you walk around this table to play this game properly. You need some space to do that. Or
yeah, but in this case, we got to design the experience, right? So with coffee tables and things like that, you can often walk around them, and you don't have to in order to pass a level. There's a bit of luck involved as well. That helps you pass something that you can't figure out.
Yeah, and I guess you can also design the you could spin the level if you have to be mobile.
Yeah, you could, but then you have this tricky thing that with another element that you need to understand how to use. So that's again comes back to this trying to be very intuitive. And in this case with a slingshot, it's actually great because a lot of people rather quickly understand how to use a slingshot. Look at the controller here. It's a very simple controller that has a trigger button here, and that's the only thing we use in the game. And it's very precise, so it knows exactly where in space it is. And you have almost sub-millimeter precision on using it. We don't need that for this game because you only pull back and you see your arch and you release it. But it's quite nice to work with. I heard that it's better for right-handed people than for left-handed because it's using something here on your right-hand side. So if you're left-hand side, your head is slightly in the way and interfering a little bit.
Wow.
But that's just what I heard. Maybe I shouldn't spread rumors. That isn't true. I'm right-handed myself, and that's been a problem for me.
Oh, cool. Okay. Maybe we don't overdo it, and if someone wants to come up and see how this Magic Leap at least looks like, we should give them some time to do that as well. So if you don't have any more further questions, I'd like to thank Tommy for coming. Yeah, sure.
So yeah, that's good. So the question was the prices. The price point right now, $2,300 approximately, is only available in North America. So you have to be there to buy it. So it's not a consumer device. It's what they've called a creators edition. So it's for companies that want to explore the space. And they have said that they will make a consumer device soon. Whatever that means, nobody knows really.
What is the field of view compared to the HoloLens?
It is better. I'm not sure exactly on the it's 50% or whatever, 50 degrees or whatever it's called. But we can start it so you can potentially have a look if you're lucky. You're early enough in the queue. The lenses are closer to you, and this game is designed so the field of view doesn't impact because we put the level a little bit further away, and that way the field of view is only a problem if you go close enough so the virtual objects break and you actually see the edges. So that's a good trick that some applications might be able to work with. If you have smaller objects on a distance, then they're not a problem with the field of view. It's only when you have large objects that's too close, so it breaks.
So I'm also thinking about the field of view because the field of view is naturally one of the key problems, at least, or the vulnerabilities with the HoloLens, is that you're actually obscured pretty much by these, since it's closer to your eye as well. It's that you're maybe not really aware of the the issue as much as you have this glass entirely. You see everything with the HoloLens you see around you.
That's true. Here you have to kind of direct your head a little bit to look in a new direction. So but it's a very interesting device because you can have a conversation while you have it on you. In comparison with virtual reality, when we show our virtual reality titles, the journalist will go in there and you can't communicate with them while they're there because they're hearing other things and not seeing what you're saying. So it's a much more social device, and that's one of the things that I definitely think that augmented reality is going to be much bigger than virtual reality. They will eventually kind of merge and be more or less the same. You'll probably be able to have the same type of headset or glasses in order to do both. But for augmented reality, something that you replace your smartphone with, it will have to be very light, a similar form factor as glasses. Some of the leading scientists are saying that they think that's about 8 to 10 years away. So that's the type of time frame where we're working with here.
Okay.
Another question? Yes, that's. No. This was something that we did because we were very curious about the Magic Leap itself and wanted to test something. We also identified that as a small studio, we wanted to work with more famous IP to get more people interested in testing it and seeing. And that aspect worked really well. We had a massive amount of journalists who tried this in San Francisco when we had an event there. And they were all very positively. So they all had played Angry Birds before on their phone almost 10 years ago, and now they got to experience it again. And that sense of sentimentality was very powerful for them to actually write a really good write-up about it. And some of them came into the room saying that we don't like Magic Leap and we don't like Angry Birds, but here, give it to me. And they still went away very, very positive. So that was a lot of fun to see. And I definitely think one of the reasons why they tried the Magic Leap before and then they tried it with something where you were looking at a larger object, where you saw the field of view problem much clearer, where this game was more designed on working with the strength of the platform.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay. With that, we ended like 10 minutes earlier, and I hope you maybe get some time to play around with this.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you.
This is